Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Bolch and my guest is Peter Kentley, a former captain for Singapore Airlines. Welcome back, Peter.
Good afternoon, Gavin.
Good to have you on twice.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
In fact, we might extend it to 3. I was in Greece in 1974, flying Olympic back in those days, and I woke up on the lawns outside the airport with a gun in my ear, a rifle actually. I had trespassed onto the lawn that said keep off the grass, and the guards were doing their job. That was how I was introduced to Athens. You said something like no wheelchairs for me. What's going on here, Peter, in Athens for you?
Well, I was a pilot with Singapore Airlines, as I mentioned in the previous interview, Gavin, and I was crewing into Athens on a turnaround and went for a walk. Came back next morning, getting ready to go to work, and suddenly I felt nauseous and went out on the balcony to get some fresh air. That didn't do any good, and I thought, boy, I'm in trouble here. So I rang the hotel reception, and it was all I could do then to even prop the door open so a crew member could get into the room. And 5 minutes later, a doctor arrived, took one look at me and rang an ambulance, because he was spoke in Greece, so I didn't know what he was doing. Then pulled out a cardiogram and told me I was having a heart attack. So suddenly I was being wheeled out of my hotel room in a wheelchair, and I'm thinking, as you said, wheelchairs are other people, not for healthy airline pilots. And seeing the looks on people's faces, and so I entered the ambulance, and it was only a 5-minute journey to the local hospital. And on the journey, I said to God, well, I'm ready to come or I'm ready to stay, whatever you want. And that was my time in Athens.
All right, well, let's wind the clock forward a little bit. And in Melbourne, I can remember being kind of woken up with the thought I had to go and see Peter Kentley. He's in the hospital. And you'd had a bypass. Tell me about that and how, what shall we say, a heart attitude also changed. What went on here? Well,
if I just go back to that ambulance at that moment, it was a point in time of meeting God in a life-arresting way. And I consider that all my days, my given days are up then. And so every day after that is a gift of grace, gift of God's grace. So I treat every day, every breath, every step as a gift of God's grace, and want to use it well for the life that He has given me. And then, as you said, Gavin, that was in 1996, and in 2007 I had triple bypass, which you kindly came to visit me when I was in hospital, and had a great plumbing job, and I've been able to do well ever since. So thank you for that visit. Appreciate it.
Great. But your heart condition, that is how you, with compassion, looked at things. You've looked at your own life. A breath, each breath is valuable. You make it count for it. How did you see life? How did you see the city? How did you see people? What happened?
It's a time of being compassionate, concerned for those around you, and for the way that our nation is going. And every day now, I mean, who could imagine now, Gavin, that 5 years ago we couldn't even imagine that we'd be hearing and seeing decapitations and crucifixions occurring in the Middle East in our lifetime, and the suffering in our nation and the breakdown of families. And you realise that there is an answer to that, and the answer is a person. It's Jesus Christ. And I've been a Christian for over 40 years, and I'd have to say everything that He's done in my life has been fantastic, and you just long for other people to come into their place of freedom and release from all of the things that drive people into such difficult situations today.
Peter, just bringing those of our viewers up to date, last time we talked, we touched on the fact that you'd been involved with an association of Christian pilots and staff. Tell us just a little bit about that, and then that led you into River of Life. So let's have a bit of a history right up to today.
Well, when I was a young pilot, I was told that Christianity was a crutch for the weak. And in the 1980s, we built a fellowship of Christian Airlines personnel across the airlines, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands. And after some 8 or 9 years, the management of the airline invited us in to discuss what we were doing with them. And they said, we believe what you're contributing to the staff is good for the staff, it's good for the airline, it's good for the morale. So how can we help you? And so that was a transformation of attitude within the airlines, that what we were doing in bringing Jesus Christ through our lives to our colleagues was really helpful to the airline. And then I had the opportunity to pursue that in Africa, in Mauritius and in England, until I finished up with flying in 2002. And then we formed Australian Marketplace Connections, and we did a lot of peer mentoring for Christian leaders in business.
Mm-hmm. And you were looking at the crosshairs of this Marketplace Connection, which had 10 elements. What were those elements again?
Business, government, health, justice, media, sport, welfare, not-for-profits, and so on. Yeah, so they're just practical ways to find out who are the Christian organisations that have a hope for Christ in those domains, and to bring the hope of Christ into people's everyday occupation when they're working in those domains.
Yes. All right. Now, if you were to come right up to date, and we'll move into this more in the next segment, what are you doing today?
Well, in 2013 I was invited to organise a conference across the churches of Melbourne to bring Dr. David Yonggi Cho from Korea, from the largest church in the world, to Melbourne. And then we realised after that a river of life is something that's progressive and moving, not just an event. So we ran prayer meetings and Christian organisation, bring Christians together in the marketplace across the city. And then just recently we were asked to change the name in a vision from River of Life to Christian Federation. So we're in the process of growing that ministry to bring together kingdom partners, churches, individuals, Christian organisations who want to see Jesus glorified in our city and nation.
Well, we're going to take a break on that note, Peter. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Bolsh, and my guest is Peter Kentley, a former captain for Singapore Airlines. Peter, you were mentioning about this federation of, what was it again?
Christian Federation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're an organisation, a coalition of kingdom partners, different organisations who, like Christian Media Australia or Sports Chaplaincy Australia, so certain churches and individuals who want to work together to see reformation of Church and Marketplace. Mm-hmm. I use the word reformation because I'm not talking about the 1517 Reformation. I'm talking about how we interact as the Christian church through our daily occupations in the marketplace.
Okay, now could we say that unity's part of that, or are we a very united community?
Far from it. That's the hardest. People are so busy and they're so connected and so intense about their own ministry. It's very hard for them to work in a convergent way. But there are certain things as a church we can only achieve if we have what I call convergence, which is a number of people, organisations working together for a common objective, for a common blessing.
Okay, so we're looking at Melbourne, right? So we're getting off the dot that is I, me and myself and what I'm
Well, we're talking
on.
Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Sydney, Brisbane, so we are going national.
Okay. So where's it at? We're still in Melbourne. Here we are. We're talking out of Melbourne, and we've got our structure, our business structure. What's your mission statement again?
We want to facilitate church and marketplace reformation to glorify Jesus in every domain of the nation.
So a holistic approach.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Tell me about the other states. How are they going?
Well, we've had tremendous progress in Adelaide, great connection with beautiful people over there, and with Margaret Court and others in Perth, and friends also in Sydney and Brisbane. So there's a real opportunity to see churches and Christian organisations functioning in unity to grow the respect and the honour of Jesus in our daily occupations. So what would that look like, Gavin? Could I give you an illustration?
Certainly, and you can also give me, is there a scriptural basis for this unity?
Well, in Psalm 110, which is the most quoted psalm in the New Testament, it says Jesus is waiting for his enemies to be brought as a footstool to his feet. So in other words, it's not, that sounds quite extreme, but it's very common, because there's nothing that we crave more in society than justice and righteousness, isn't it? Everybody wants justice and righteousness. And that is actually the foundation of the kingdom of God, is love, justice and righteousness. But the question is, how do we work that out? So for example, as an airline pilot, or before I retired, as soon as the passenger door is closed, the law of the land says that the final disposition of the cabin and crew rests with the pilot in command. So how do you use that responsibility to bring forth the kingdom of God? I'm just using this as a practical illustration in the kingdom of God. Well, the first thing I would do is be well prepared professionally, and I think every Christian, wherever they are, should be the best professional they can possibly be wherever they are, and they should extend their studies and abilities to that end. Then when the flight attendants would come on board before the passengers, I'd go around and meet them all, introduce myself, and I'd meet with the purser or the manager of the cabin crew. And so something like, or when we're in Paris, I'll be going to St Michael's Church. If any of your cabin crew would like to come, they'd be most welcome. So that was just a non-threatening way to let them know who I am and what the principles are and what the values are that I function on. And I'm also thinking of other cabin crews who might be under stress, that they are comforted and strengthened by that. And then in my relationships in the cockpit, to work with humility and grace and professionalism, to take really responsibility, my task to get my passengers as efficiently and safely as I can from A to B. And there would never be any blasphemy in my cockpits. And in conversations when there are private conversations, to be interested in people and to ask non-abrasive questions, especially when you're free from your duty. For example, I often used to ask Islamic people, tell me about Islam, because I don't know much about Islam. And they were happy to talk to me for a few minutes and then ask me what I believed, and then I'd just share my testimony. I wouldn't bother answering with apologetics, but I can give my testimony in a few seconds. You know, Jesus, everything he's done in my life has been fantastic, and I just love being in that relationship with him.
Okay. Now, you said to a pilot once, when there's spare time, what does the spare time look like? Like, you take your hands off the controls, what's happening to the aeroplane?
Oh, we have very strict procedures in the cockpit where the autopilot's flying, and if the autopilot's flying, which pilot is overviewing, responsible, and then one pilot overviews the other pilot who's overviewing the autopilot. So it's a very, we call them SOP, standard operating procedures. Mm-hmm. But we have, on long haul flights, we have rest periods when we can leave the cockpit and be replaced by another pilot, and there are often opportunities to sit and have a coffee with the cabin crew or whatever. And then of course there's plenty of off-duty opportunities when you're on long haul trips for 3 or 4 days in crew buses and hotels and so on. Okay,
so there was that, I'm sitting on the tarmac and I say to my co-pilot, what if a couple of molecules and atoms had a chat? So what was that conversation?
Oh, I was at Sydney Airport waiting to take off on runway 16 with the parks braked behind a 747, which was occupying the full dimensions of the windshield. And I said to my co-pilot, I wonder if some molecules of bauxite up in Weipa had a conversation one day. They could say to each other, if we kick around for a few million years, we'll make ourselves a 747. I just left it at that, but when we were up on the cruise sometime later, in a beautiful afternoon and blue skies, he turned around to me and said, a bloke should do something about that. And I'd forgotten the conversation. I said, oh, what do you mean? He said, the creator who made all of this, a bloke should do something to get in touch with him, shouldn't he?
And so here we are, life in a cockpit of a large plane where ordinary conversations take place. Coming down to earth, we'll have a break soon and we'll go into more detail of where the Christian Federation's heading or been, and look forward to what you have to say. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Bolch, and my guest is Peter Kentley, a former captain for Singapore Airlines. Peter, we were talking about what does the kingdom values of Jesus Christ look like in the marketplace, and you shared as an airline pilot. I'm just going to touch on the arts for a moment. A friend of mine, Eugene, runs Candlelight Productions, and about 6 years ago they decided to enter the Melbourne Comedy Festival with something called Squeaky Clean Comedy.
Fantastic.
Which they said would never take off. They can't find venues big enough. It has the largest attendance of all the comedy venues. And this year, 3 other people who took out space said that they too had decided to change to Squeaky Clean Comedy. And the organisers contacted Eugene and said, what's going on here? You've broke all the records, you've had awards, you're making such a difference that even 3 other comedians have decided to go squeaky clean.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yes. So what are some of the other areas?
Well, for example, we're a coalition, so we try to do what we can to help people succeed in their particular sphere of influence. So, for example, in health, in Section 8 of the Victorian abortion law, doctors are prohibited from using their own conscience. So freedom of conscience is a huge issue in one part of the context of the abortion law. So how do we bring together health professionals, media professionals, and others to help them succeed? And how do we have a 5-year objective to change that aspect of the law, which is an injustice that's existing at the moment? In government, for example, so many of our kingdom partners are passionate about the fact that children are being overlooked in the debate on same-sex marriage, and we're focusing on the rights of individuals, and we're not actually looking at the needs of children to have a mum and a dad, and we're almost creating the stolen generation Mark II by legislation which is not holistic enough. So how do we work across different organisations, family organisations, government organisations, Australian Christian Lobby and so on, to help them succeed by bringing a greater coalescence of different people, different bodies to work together for a common objective. In business, for example, we're having a major conference just coming up, or a major seminar day coming up in July, the 11th, to help people in business to discover what's their God assignment in their everyday occupation. Not just going to work to earn money and to look after your family and to satisfy individual needs, but what's the God need? What is God's assignment to your life? And helping people to discover their assignment and then create a space where they can grow, pray, have prayer groups that support them, help them to meet others who are on similar assignments and help them to grow. So we're a coalition of people who are helping each other to take the kingdom of God into the world on an everyday basis.
So it's quite out there in the commercial world for Muslims to request a prayer room, a prayer space for their moments of prayer as needed. So I would imagine, being such an open society as we are, management wouldn't mind putting a room aside or have use of a room for prayer and discussions, would they?
Well, Gavin, we live in a world that's promoting tolerance for everybody except Christians. So there's tolerance for Islam, but there is not tolerance for Christians. So in a way, the world we live in is becoming more Christophobic, and even more reason why we need to work together. And people in the marketplace definitely need to have the support of their own local pastors from their own local churches. So we're working proactively with groups of pastors as well, and they're learning how that they can support their people in the marketplace, in prayer and in support and understanding the issues they're going through. One of my friends at one stage was given the task by his New York board to implement honesty in the way they did business in Asia Pacific. Well, that person needs a lot of support from his local church to pull off a Christian mandate like that given by a New York board. So how can we help people succeed in those mandates?
Yes. Okay, so these mandates are out there, and organisations, these 10 different spheres of activity for mankind, are looking for people who are honest, caring, compassionate and diligent.
And inspirational, because we need to lead by professionalism, values and inspiration, not by being heavy-handed, judgmental or critical.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that's where part of the thing comes up in our conferences and our meetings and our Sunday meetings, to inspire people how they can be great ambassadors of the kingdom of God in their daily occupation. Mm-hmm. Not to be the ones pointing the finger, but how do you uphold people? How do you strengthen them? How do you love them? And how do you be a great inspirer?
Yes. One of the great stories I think that has come out of Melbourne is Thank You Water. Have you heard some of the stories?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So there's some inspiration there. Do you want to comment on that? What you've heard?
Oh well, we've had opportunity to promote that ministry in a number of many numbers of our events. So, yeah, we're very supportive of those kind of ministries.
So here's a 24-year-old who looks for a God assignment in the workplace, basically, and comes up with Thank You Water. Inspirational for young people today.
Yes, but it's not just specialised Christian ministries. It's how do you serve Jesus in your everyday occupation, just wherever you are. For example, if I could just go back to being a pilot just for a moment for a simple little illustration. When I used to sit down in the cockpit to start my days flying, the first thing I'd do is say a prayer. Lord, thank you for the gifts to be able to do this. Thank you for the training and equipping, putting me in this position. May I serve you well, and may I serve my crew and serve my passengers really well today. And now it's very interesting, Gavin, that the word avoda in the Hebrew can be translated worship or work. So actually when you bring prayer into your work, into your heart attitude, you've actually converted your work to worship. And so often people in the church only interpret worship in terms of music and song. And not to diminish that, but just taking a heart attitude of love and gratitude with you and giving thanks to God in all things, and being his ambassador of justice and righteousness and peace and inspiring people to do well. That's being a great ambassador, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And so we'll pick up on that point in our next interview. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. But join us again with Peter next week. Goodbye.